I am a huge fan of suffering. I know that probably sounds a little strange and slightly macabre, and I seem like such an upbeat, positive person, or so I've been told. And while I'm most definitely an optimist, I believe that the struggle we face in life is key to forming who we are. When I was 16, I had the typical struggles of a guy my age. Trying to plan for a summer job, trying to figure out what to do after university, or simply trying to understand why the girls in my class were running away from me rather than running towards me. This was the extent of the struggles that I had to face at the time. And then one day, on the football field, my whole life turned upside down. I remember the moment perfectly. It was during a spring practice where the quarterback threw me the ball, and when I went to catch it, I completely missed. My coach called me over to see what was wrong, and I explained that I was seeing double. It isn't that easy to catch a football when you see two of them flying at you. He thought I might have a concussion and suggested that I go see my doctor. I was feeling nauseous. I had headaches. I had blurred and double vision, and my left eye had started to turn inward. It was at this point that my parents decided we should go in for a CT scan, and boy was I surprised when it had me in an ambulance to Children's Hospital in Vancouver, where I had an MRI. I had a brain tumor. I was rushed into the operating room for something called a burr hole surgery. I remember those moments just before, laying in that hospital bed with my parents and my 5 siblings gathered around me. These moments leading to that surgery were such a blur that they felt like they happened in cutscenes. 5 days later, I had my second brain surgery to remove the tumor. What was supposed to be an 8-hour surgery lasted nearly 9.5 hours. I'm not sure what happened during that hour and a half, but I know that my family was extremely worried as they waited through every excruciating moment to hear how that surgery went. I often joke, I actually had the easier time of it because I got to sleep through the whole thing. Following this surgery, I had incredible swelling in my head, and it made seeing difficult. I learned a year later that had I not had that surgery when I did, I could have died from the swelling in my brain. As my vision came back, my eyes were extremely sensitive to the light. I could hardly walk. I lost nearly 40 pounds. For the next 3 weeks, I recovered at Children's Hospital before beginning my planned treatment. 6 rounds of chemotherapy and 30 sessions of radiation to my head and my spine. While I was at the hospital, a social worker came to my room and explained that the treatment might leave me without the ability to have my own kids. This was incredibly hard to grasp at 16. I began my treatment over the summer between my grade 11 and 12 year, completing 2 rounds of chemotherapy before September. These lasted anywhere from 3 to 5 days. As I went through my treatment, I felt like an outsider at my school. Fortunately, I've actually been blessed with a pretty great shaped head, if I do say so myself, so I didn't mind being bald. But I quickly became that guy in grade 12 who was sick. When I finished my treatment, you may think it was the happiest time of my life. Maybe it should have been. It wasn't. I felt lost. I had to navigate a new life, a life without the structure or certainty that having cancer actually gave me. I was battling anxiety and depression. I felt like I would never get out of that darkness. Frankly, I would have rather had the cancer again. It is said in life that there are 2 certainties: death and taxes. Now, I would like to amend that slightly and say that there are 3 things that are certain: death, taxes, and suffering. Although I suppose taxes are a form of suffering. No matter where you were born, your socioeconomic status, your race, or your religion, each one of us will be faced with and shaped by several forms of adversity in our lifetime. Facing adversity is a universal human experience. In a world eager to avoid discomfort, we hear persistent reminders of escape routes. On social media, in advertisements, on TV shows. And sadly, some of us turn to drugs or alcohol to numb the physical and emotional pain we are going through. I believe that avoiding hardship is the wrong approach. Most of the time, these experiences are simply unavoidable. And the more that we run from them, and the less we learn from them, the less prepared we are going to be the next time we encounter suffering. And as I've hopefully convinced you, we will face it again. We must be willing to suffer. A readiness to accept the suffering in our life is pivotal in overcoming the challenge we are faced with. Much like navigating a treacherous path, the key is not to turn back or resist, but to face the obstacle ahead. While I was in the hospital, there was a young man in the room next to me who was diagnosed around the same time. He was angry. He was yelling and cursing at the nurses and his mom in his room. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't get angry about the cards we are dealt or feel frustrated at our circumstances, especially when they are happening through no fault of our own. But if we take out our frustrations on others and stay in this state of mind, we ultimately make things more challenging for ourselves and those around us. It all comes down to living in the present. In order to grow in resilience and face the struggle we are going through, we have to remain present. When speaking with my wife, Danica, about the idea of suffering, I realized that when we are going through something difficult, we can often think about what happened in the past to bring us to that moment. In a similar way, we may fixate on what might happen in the future. Neither of these perspectives will actually help us through the difficult thing we are going through and ultimately make us lose sight of what is right here and now. Staying in the present is how we get through the difficult thing and grow in resilience. While I was going through my own treatment, at times it was difficult to accept my circumstances. And then I met someone who changed my entire perspective. At Children's Hospital, there was a teen group that I got to attend. And as you can imagine, at 17, I was a little bigger than some of these kids at Children's Hospital. But at one of these events, I met someone who was actually older than me. Her name was Brooke. She had these great big round glasses and this short pixie hair and a smile that really made you feel seen. We became great friends through this group, but it was at one of these events that Brooke was not her typical smiley self. At the end of the night, she told me that her cancer was progressing and that she was in palliative care. She didn't have many months to live. I learned later that Brooke had actually been in palliative care for months, and I would have never have guessed this by seeing how much joy she brought to that group. Brooke had something called her living list, rather than a bucket list, a concept that I grew to love. Her living list was to see as many concerts as she could. And that night, Brooke invited me to see Taylor Swift in Vancouver for her 1989 tour. That day with Brooke and at the concert was one of the best experiences I have ever had. We went kayaking, ate some great donuts, grabbed a Starbucks, and finish it off with an incredible concert. Brooke invited me into living in the present moment in a way I had never done before. It wasn't long after that concert that I was going into the hospital for a routine test, and Brooke's dad caught me in the hallway. he told me I needed to come to the emergency room. When I went to the room that Brooke was in, the lights were off, and she was laying in the hospital bed without those big round glasses. But when I entered, she still gave me that big smile. I went and sat at her bedside, and we got to visit for a little while before I had to say goodbye. I didn't realize at the time as I left that room that that would be the last time I'd ever see Brooke. The next day, she passed. Brooke was able to live the way that she did, despite knowing that she was dying, because she lived fully in the present. It was at her celebration of life that the pastor talked about a phrase that she lived by. Live your dash. He explained that the dash can be found on our tombstone between our date of birth and our date of death. In simple terms, that dash represents the present moment. This idea of being present is not unique to Brooke. It has existed for thousands of years and can be found in most religions and spiritual movements. Whether that's meditation, prayer, or being centered, remaining present is how we move through the difficult moment. There is simply no other way forward. No one owns suffering. When we hear a story of someone who went through something incredibly difficult, we might think to ourselves that there is no way we could go through that. Or we might think that we shouldn't complain about our own circumstances and what we're going through. Take a moment and rid yourself of that idea. We all face challenging things. I may not be able to go through what you're going through, and you may not be able to have gone through what I went through. But I believe wholeheartedly that we are given the strength and the grace to endure the difficult thing we are facing when we face it. Suffering and struggle are important teachers. They help to form us. Like Michelangelo revealing the statue of David by chiseling away at that slab of marble, the myriad of hardships we face in life reveal the best versions of ourselves. Now, I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a huge fan of suffering. It's not that I enjoy the experience of suffering, but I have learned it is one of life's greatest teachers. I'm sometimes asked, if you could change what happened to you, would you? And without hesitation, my answer is always no. I look at my journey through cancer as a pivotal point in my life, a course correction that has led to everything else I've been able to experience. Finishing high school, graduating from university, meeting the love of my life, Danica, and getting married. And that news about not being able to have kids, my son James is almost 1. If it wasn't for these experiences of suffering that I went through, I may not know all these joys and meaning in my own life. So, the next time you face a difficult moment, be it a paper cut, a job loss, or even a cancer diagnosis, I challenge you. Embrace your suffering and choose to be present through it.